When the rain begins to fall, our world collides with another. Things are different. The mist of the rain, the blanket of darkness from the clouds. It's a world much like our own, but it is shrouded in uncertainty, dreariness, and fear. And just as all facets of life have adapted to be active at certain times of day, so do certain terrors become active when the rain begins to fall. Be it lonesome spirits or rapacious creatures, the rain is not the only reason to stay indoors during a downpour. Enjoy these allegedly true scary stories about things encountered in the rain. If you want to hear your story narrated in a future episode, share it with us at darkstories.org. Any allegedly true or creepy stories are welcome, but I am looking for stories about disturbing things seen in or around caves, or true scary stories that sound like creepypasta. Also, if you'd rather enjoy the show while you work, jog, drive, or sleep, follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on Spotify and iTunes. And if you can, leave us a review on iTunes too. Thank you. Now, let's begin. A Fear of the Rain, from Cory E. I wasn't always afraid of the rain. Something happened when I was a child to make me dread it whenever the droplets began to come down. The story begins when I was around 7. My family had recently moved to a new county, where both my parents would have better jobs. Our new home, while quaint, was about a 20-minute drive from the school. After a few months of attending my new school, I met a friend whose name isn't important. What is important is that he invited me to spend the night at his house. My parents were easygoing, so they immediately said yes when I asked if I could spend the night with him on Friday. When the time came around, we both walked to his house, which was even closer to our school. What I didn't know at the time was that he didn't ask permission from his parents for me to go to his house, and the closer we walked towards his house, the more paranoid he got, until he wouldn't let me inside. He apologized over and over, saying that he thought it would be a good idea just to have me come over, as he was afraid that his parents would say no if he just asked. He thought that if he just brought me over instead, unannounced, they would have no choice but to say yes. But now he was terrified that he would get in a lot of trouble, and he changed his mind. We were at the door and he got inside first, closing it on me. He had opened it just a crack to explain this to me. He was crying, telling me that he was very, very sorry, but I needed to go home before his parents got home. Just some silly kid controversy. That guy was my best friend at the time. So 7-year-old me, though sad, knew that I had to walk home now. Because A, I didn't have a phone to call my parents at the time, and B, if I stayed any longer, even to use my friend's phone, his parents might show up, and I did not want him to get in trouble. I had no other choice but to walk home myself. The problem with that was that it was about to rain. The skies were cloudy and dark now, despite it being about 3:45 in the afternoon. Choking back tears at my disappointment and feelings of betrayal, I began my walk home. Now, in my child mind, I thought I would be able to walk home really quick. All I knew was that the drive to school was always fast, so the walk home would be no different. I was dead wrong. After walking for a straight hour, and not even being halfway there, the rain started to come down, and I was scared, homesick, unfamiliar with my surroundings. I panicked and looked around, and soon noticed the edge of a forest nearby, and then the memories came flooding back. I was pretty sure then that those were the woods my cousin and I played in last year. We had roamed around in them and pretended to be Jedi from Star Wars for hours, until making it to the other side, which was here, right by the road I was walking on. I was sure of it. Not sure if my face was covered in tears or rain or both. I wiped my eyes dry and I began to approach the forest. To my relief, things did look familiar. There was that tree with a knot that looked like a face. That ages-old and decaying tree stump we found that had a snail on it. Yeah, if I kept walking, I thought to myself, I'd be in my own backyard. Once again, my underdeveloped brain didn't realize how far out the woods were, and that it wasn't a shortcut at all. It would actually take me much longer to make it home through these woods. But I'm sure even if I knew that at the time, I wouldn't care. I'd rather walk a familiar, longer road than a shorter, unfamiliar one. I walked and walked and walked, the rain coming down more and more and the sky growing darker by the second. I have no idea how long I'd been in there, when the skies began to dim even further, signaling that the sun was going down. Had it really been several hours? The tears were rushing back. I knew I was going the right way, but why wasn't I seeing my backyard yet? The porch light, the window into the kitchen. Both of these things were always visible from a distance, and yet everything was getting darker. Tired and scared, I found some shelter under a tree. I sat there atop some damp leaves. I rested my backpack on my head, in a desperate attempt to shelter myself from the rain that got through the leaves above me. After all, it was early autumn, so half the leaves were on the ground, while half of them remained on their branches. I just wanted to rest my legs for a while, then I would keep walking. I would make it home soon, I reminded myself. But before long, I fell asleep. When I came to, I felt a tickle on my nose. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but blackness. Reflexively, I swatted at my nose, thinking there was a bug on it. I realized it was dark out still, but not pitch black, and there was no bug on my nose. What was touching me and covering my eyes was long, black hair.
There. It's all going to be okay.
A strange, phantasmic voice echoed behind me, just behind me. My eyelids shot straight open. I stopped blinking for a while. I stopped breathing for the next few seconds. Realization after realization came to me. There was hair in front of my face that wasn't mine. 2 arms embraced me around my waist from behind, skin pale. There was someone sitting right behind me, between the tree and myself.
Don't you love the rain? It's so beautiful.
She whispered again, right into my ear, goosebumps appearing all over my body. I could feel it. Not to mention, this person sitting behind me now. She was freezing cold, colder than the raindrops that fell on us. I'd never been more scared. I remember at one point I screamed and nothing came out of my mouth, not a sound, as if I had pushed my body so hard that my voice box just broke or failed on me. I sat there petrified, afraid to move or react, because I could see her fingers. Mounds of dirt lay underneath her fingernails, which were shredded and torn. There were cuts and bruises all over her fingers and hands, dirt all over her skin. It looked like she had crawled over the ground with only her hands, in a rainstorm, no less.
We can stay here forever, you and I. No more alone.
Suddenly, her hands began to move up my body until they were covering my face on both sides. She began to squeeze my face, digging her dirty nails into my skin until it hurt. It burned like nothing I'd ever felt before. Just as I was about to scream again, and probably fail doing so once more, I heard a voice calling out for me, a different voice.
Cory!
It was my dad. The moment his voice reverberated through the forest, the long black hair suddenly shot upwards, and the nails sliced upwards across my face. I heard whoever or whatever had been behind me suddenly scurry upward at an impossible speed. I looked up just in time to see her black, long hair and pale, nearly white skin fade into the branches above. She hid herself and disappeared into the sparse leaves. I sat there alone, waiting for my parents and apparently a search party they'd gathered. I just couldn't take my eyes off of the branches, waiting to see movement, waiting to see flashes of pale skin or long black hair. I was soon discovered and taken home, given hot chocolate and a heated blanket, as well as a big, late dinner. Lacking emotion, I devoured my food, my mother and father barraging me with the same question over and over. How did I get those cuts on my face? Eventually I would reply, letting them know about the lady in the forest, the woman in the tree. But they were having none of it. Before long, they came to their own conclusion, that despite the marks looking like claws or nails raking across my face, I must have cut myself on some thorns. And that's my story. These days, whenever it rains, I can't help but think about that day. The day that I thought would be fun, spending time with my then best friend. The day I felt abandoned and alone in the rain, when something else came to find me. My Rainy Playdate, from Showersongs. I had a rough childhood, and consequently I've buried most of my memories from back then. There is one memory I've never forgotten, one that not only shaped the man I've become, but also forged my perception of life and the universe itself. I was 11 years old, the age when you can't walk a mile down the road, but you're perfectly fit to babysit your little brother all day. That was precisely the case for me. My mother was single and received no child support, as she didn't know which junkie my father was. This was also true for my brother Tommy, who was only 2 at the time. We rented a rather old house in town for cheap. Mom had just landed a new job at a nursing home as a nurse aide. I was switched to homeschool so I could take care of Tommy all day, while she was at work. Before she got the job, she used to take me and Tommy to the riverfront park every day. But we hadn't been back to the park since she was hired. Every time she got the day off, it rained, and since the park was located in a flood zone, that eliminated all chances of us going. I begged her to let me walk the quick mile there on my own, but that was out of the question to her. I started to fantasize about going to the park while she was at work, and after a few days I mustered up the courage to actually do it. I set my alarm clock to wake me up 20 minutes after she'd left, so I could be back before even Tommy woke up. I didn't like the idea of him being hungry because I wanted to swing. I laid out my outfit the night before. It consisted of a hat and sunglasses, in case someone we knew drove by. I quickly got ready, then put my pillows under my blanket, in case Mom came back for something. I made sure Tommy was sleeping, then made my way to the kitchen. I grabbed a water and a pack of Pop-Tarts. Ready to be a free man, I turned the deadbolt, then the knob, and I started my journey. Around the halfway point, the Pop-Tarts were long gone. But despite the empty bottle, the water was here to stay. The sky began to pour rain from its darkened clouds. Afraid of getting too muddy and then busted, I turned around and headed back home. I mounted the creaky porch and turned the doorknob, except it didn't turn. I nearly smacked myself. I had unlocked the deadbolt, but not the knob. I didn't even bother checking the windows. My mom's more paranoid than me. I sat on the porch for some time, trying to figure out what I should do. Finally, I decided, screw it, I'm going anyway. By the time I made it to the park, the river was already rising, and I was soaked. The way my clothes stuck to my skin made me feel like a pirate. Suddenly, the stick on the ground became my cutlass, and the playground equipment morphed into pirate ships, firing cannonballs at each other. I swam through the wood chips, boarding each ship and killing everyone on board. My final showdown was with the SS Gladiator's hook-handed captain. He got a slash on my arm and then my leg. I was forced to dive down the slide and plummet into the ocean. When I hit the wood chips, there was a big splash, followed by 3 smaller splashes coming from underneath the slide set. That brought me back to reality. My sword was once more a flimsy stick, and I was no longer Charson, the pirate slayer. I was just an 11-year-old boy in the rain. For the first time since I'd gotten there, I noticed how cold the rain was, and how high the river had gotten. I scurried to my feet, and hesitantly looked under the slide. There was nothing aside from wet wood chips. I took a moment to calm down. I was more than ready to go home, but I felt as if I owed it to Charson to finish his battle, while I had the rain. I got back into the zone, and swam underneath the ship to the other side. I stuck my cutlass deep into the hull, using it to climb up the side, feeling like Jango Fett in his fight against Obi-Wan. When I got to the top, something else shook me back into reality. I was met with a blue-lipped boy. His darkened veins showed through his greenish-black skin, and he was holding a stick, just like mine. I screamed loud enough to shatter glass as I jumped backward in terror. I crashed into the wood chips before rolling over and sprinting through the puddled ground as fast as I could, feeling water pelt my jacket with every stride. I didn't look back until I was beside the road. When I did, I could still see the boy, standing atop the slide set. He was waving at me, and somehow I found the energy to sprint even harder. My mom returned to find her son petrified, muddy and wet, curled up on the porch, Tommy's hungry cries blaring through the old walls. She gave me the worst spanking I've ever had, but I didn't get grounded. When I told her what happened, she looked as if she'd seen a ghost. She told me when she was a little girl, a boy she went to school with was playing in that same park during a flood, and was taken by the current. La Llorona, from Mike V. This happened when I was living in Mexico. I was 14 years old and it was the rainy season. One day I was hanging out with my cousins. One of them told us that the night before he had heard La Llorona, and the rest of us began laughing, because as much as we were into the paranormal, we never expected one of the popular legends to happen to us. So he told me that if I wanted to sleep over that night, as it was supposed to rain again, and a river forms up by his house, that's when she appears, so I could see her myself. Well, I was curious, so I said yes. Later on that night, we were watching TV. It was me, my 2 cousins, my aunt and uncle. But my aunt and uncle had already gone to sleep. It was 3 in the morning when my cousin started hiding under his blanket. I asked him what he was doing. He began to explain to us that it was about to start. I asked what he was talking about. He said that it started last night. The dogs were going to bark, and as soon as he said that, the dogs did begin to bark. He then said the cats would start fighting too. And once more, the cats began to fight each other. And if that wasn't enough, he said that the chickens and cows were going to go crazy. And at that moment, we heard them making a ruckus outside. While he was saying all that, I was beginning to feel scared. He was clenching onto the blanket even harder to the point that his hands were shaking. Then he said that all the animals were going to stop making noise at the same time, and as soon as he finished that sentence, all of it stopped. Not a single cricket was making noise anymore. The night was dead silent. At that moment, my cousin said,
"She's coming. She's coming."
In my fear, I asked him who was coming, as if I didn't already know who he was talking about. I didn't want to believe it. And then we heard it, a wail in the distance. I was asking my cousins to go peek at the window to see if they could see her, but the one under the blanket would not move. So his brother and I began walking towards the door to open a window. We heard the crying going up and down the street about 3 times, so I told my cousin, as soon as the cries start to sound more distant, we should open the window then. I was building up the courage when my cousin began to scream. He went to hide next to his brother. This scream shook me, so I did the same thing. The following day, we told our uncles and grandma what happened. They took it as a joke, but my grandma in a serious voice told us that her wails are the exact opposite of what they sound. You see, she said, when it comes to La Llorona, when you hear her cries close, she's actually far, but when you hear her far, she's very close. She said it was good that we didn't look out the window, because one of us may have been taken. My experience with a Wendigo and Something Else. From BryanM. Just as a heads up, this story does contain graphic descriptions of my dog who sadly perished during the incident. I live in a small rural town in Pennsylvania. My house is located deep within the woods, and my nearest neighbor is roughly 4 to 5 miles from me. Let me start off by saying I love the forest. I love nature itself, and as a child, my grandma would always tell me that the woods would protect me. Yeah, I know. Sounds kind of odd, but I did believe her a bit. I'll tell you why later on in the story. She was also Native American. She believed in lots of supernatural stuff. To get things started, the woods near my house had a trail which led from my backyard into a dense part of the forest. Most days I would bring along my dog Zero, a black pit bull who was nothing but loving towards anyone he met, especially me. I did so often that it became a part of my daily schedule. I would go out around 4 to 7 p.m. I'd bring my dog and sit on this big but flat rock that was located near the end of the trail. Usually I would smoke and think about life and play with Zero. I should have mentioned this first, but every time I'd walk in, I would feel as if someone or something was watching me from afar, and Zero would sometimes look into the wilderness as if he caught sight of something. I can assure you I got the sense that I was being watched over. Dare I even say protected at times. Even when I got that feeling, the forest was alive. It felt as if everything there was residing peacefully. I would sometimes ask my father what kind of animals he thought resided in our part of the woods. He just mentioned the basic things, like deer, squirrels, your occasional bear or two, but nothing I should be highly afraid of. He also reminded me that Zero was with me. He'd protect me. So every day I'd walk in those woods, joyful and full of peace, not a single drop of worriedness. But then it happened. This incident took place 3 years ago on the month of February. I got out of work and I was eager to smoke and relax in the forest for a bit. By the time I got home, the sun was already setting, but I decided to still go out, as it wouldn't be the first time I went out after dusk. I got my smoke, my dog, and a pocket knife, which I only used to carve things into trees and such. I also brought a flashlight. By the time I got out of my house, the moon was out, and there was a graceful breeze in the air. I turned on my flashlight and started on my small journey. After a few steps, I suddenly heard my dad call out my name. I turned back, thinking he just got home, but soon I realized his car wasn't there. I was a bit confused, but I shrugged it off on me being exhausted from work. As I was walking towards the flat rock, Zero seemed to be a little bit wary. He kept looking around with his ears straight up. I didn't think too much about it. I kept calling him over so he would be closer to me, and he listened. At some point during the walk, I did realize that I wasn't getting the feeling that I was being watched as I usually did, and the woods were awfully quiet. The sound of my boots hitting the ground and your occasional twig snapping were the only sounds that occupied the night. I finally made it to my spot. I sat down and started smoking. Roughly 30 minutes passed and I'm petting Zero, who was acting kind of strange still. I realized Zero was focused on a singular portion of the area. The area was surrounded by trees and a cluster of bushes in the bottom. I pointed my flashlight to that area, thinking that I'd see a deer or some wild animal, but I saw nothing. I turned my head so I could use my free hand to pet Zero, and as soon as I turned my head, a feeling rushed over me, something I've never felt during my time in the woods. It was a feeling of pure fear. Then I hear it. "Bryan, where are you?" It sounded just like my dad, but something was wrong. It was unnatural, as if someone recorded his voice and started playing it. I turned my head, and in that moment the hairs on the back of my neck started standing up. Slightly apparent by the tree in front of me, I could see half a body, roughly 7 to 8 feet tall, and a head which looked like a deer, but the skin was, well, falling off, revealing a skeletal snout. The antlers were all deformed and unnatural looking, and it had sharp teeth all equal in size, filling its mouth. One arm was gripping onto the tree, and it was so long, it looked like it could well easily pass its knees, with hands that showed long, sharp claws, and eyes that were yellow and reflecting the light from my flashlight. At the same time, its sharp gaze pierced my soul. Then it spoke to me, something that will haunt me for the rest of my years. "There you are." I was going to book it until Zero went crazy and lunged headfirst towards the creature. The creature moved back behind the tree away from sight, and Zero headed right for it. I stood in shock. I couldn't believe my dog ran right towards it. Barking and scuffling soon filled the air, then a slight thud, and pure silence filled it afterwards. I knew it then that my dog had been killed. Tears ran down my face, and utter fear filled my body. I was frozen. I couldn't run. Then, from out of the bushes, Zero had come back, but instead of running to me, it appeared as if that creature had slid him towards me, and what I saw scarred me. My Zero was there lifeless, a gash on the side of his body. I panned my flashlight back towards the tree, and once again with its arm across the tree, it stood there looking at me. I could have swore it smiled. Then it made this awkward movement, as if it was about to lunge right at me. Then something happened that will make me question my sanity, my existence, everything. A loud howl-like sound manifested from behind me. It was like 100 wolf howls at once. I told myself, no, please, don't tell me there's another one of those things out here. I heard a twig break in front of me. I turned right back to that tree to see the creature starting to walk away. It just simply vanished into the dark. After that, I passed out. What I remember next is my dad crying his eyes out and shaking me. When I finally gained proper awareness, he grabbed me and hugged me. When I realized what happened the night before, I started to shake, and my anxiety was in overdrive. To make matters worse, I can still see Zero's body on the floor. I looked around and saw no tracks on the ground to see if what I saw yesterday was indeed something not known to man. But as it was raining, it had washed away any tracks that were made. Fast forward later that day, I'm in my living room, Zero's body covered in a blanket, and my dad was asking me what happened. He had the police coming over. He kept checking if I had any wounds on me, and I told him again and again that I was fine, but I was still tearing up. I was more concerned about my dead dog than me. I lied to the cops, telling them a random hungry bear came and Zero gave his life for me, and that the bear must have run off injured or something. Fast forward to December. I had buried Zero near the flat rock with my dad, and we moved to the city. We had a get-together with my family. I was beginning to move on from what happened, but I still get these nightmares about the creature, and it always ends with that howl waking me up. When I talked to my grandma again, I decided to tell her over anyone else. She hugged me and believed me as I teared up. She also mentioned that the creature I saw was likely a Wendigo. I had no idea what it was, but the description she gave me resembled the exact same thing I saw that night. A vile creature that looks like a decomposed deer with falling flesh, sharp teeth, and claws that has the ability to mimic people's voices in order to lure a victim into a painful demise. But the moment I mentioned that there could have been two of them because of the howl I heard, she looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "That wasn't the Wendigo. That was the woods protecting you." What she said will stick with me for the rest of all time. I did some thinking to see if I could possibly identify my mysterious protector, because I know there was something else in those woods. It couldn't have been the woods itself. Something much more intimidating made that Wendigo back away from me. Then I realized all those times I felt as if something was watching over me, protecting me. It was all real, and my mind was only able to come up with one word, one thing that could intimidate a creature like that. Something akin to, or straight from Native American culture. Something that could have howled like that. Maybe it was a werewolf.